This is Gabrielle, a star performer for the Ice Capades. Alcohol is used to prepare the skin for electrode placement. Here at the ice arena, recordings will be obtained with telemetering equipment. Electrodes are prepared and applied in the usual laboratory manner. They are placed by the outer canthi to detect horizontal components of eye movements. The electrophysiological recorder is located at rinkside. It will be fed impulses from a telemetering receiver, which will pick up eye movement signals from a transmitter strapped to the skater. The procedure for all of our tests will require the skaters to perform their specialized high-velocity spins and then visually orient themselves toward our camera. Gabrielle is spinning here as she does during her routine skating performances. Her eyes are open when she stops, and she appears in complete control of her eyes and her balance. When we examine her recording, vigorous eye movements occur during the spin, and a few beats of nystagmus appear immediately after she stops. The response is then quickly inhibited as a result of visual fixation. Next, Gabrielle will visually orient herself toward the camera at the end of her spin, and then close her eyes. Vestibular nystagmus is clearly visible behind her closed lids, is evidenced in her recordings, and she states that she is quite aware of her eye movement. Here's Doug Austin. Doug is spinning here under an eyes open condition. As we slow down his motion by high-speed photography, note how his eyes roll up in the direction of the spin. You may also note a reddening of his nose and facial distortion as he reaches a velocity of 240 RPM at this point. Doug holds his spin for a good length of time and stops abruptly. A strong but very brief nystagmus is clearly evidenced until the eye movements are brought under control by visual fixation. Doug spins again with eyes closed. The skaters do not use the technique of visual spotting employed in dancing spins. Skaters not only revolve at too great a velocity to permit spotting, but they can also spin with their eyes closed. Nystagmus is unquestionably present by direct observation. The vigor of the response is apparent in the recording. This is Per Larson. Analysis of our high-speed film indicates that Per reaches a peak velocity of just over 250 RPM during this spin. With eyes open, Per shows no directly observable evidence of vestibular reactions. His recordings, however, like Gabrielle's, showed a few beats of nystagmus immediately after he stopped spinning. Per spins here with eyes closed, opens them to locate the camera, then recloses them. With eyes closed, Per shows clear evidence of a nystagmus which builds up into a very vigorous response. His records indicate a brisk, high-frequency, low-amplitude nystagmus. You will recognize Anne Margaret from our laboratory studies. Anne performs very rapid spins of short duration, and with open eyes appears to have no eye movement at all. Her tracings show marked eye movement responses as her turning speed increases, and 3 or 4 clear beats of nystagmus at the end of her spin. Then her vestibular response appears totally suppressed by visual control. You may recall that she almost completely inhibited caloric nystagmus during visual fixation in the laboratory. During this next spin, Anne reaches a peak velocity of 289 RPM. Let's examine her response with no opportunity for fixation. Her eye movements cannot be observed directly, even behind closed lids. But the recordings show an interesting effect. Vestibular nystagmus is clearly present for a few seconds at the end of her spin. Then she inadvertently rolls her eyes upward and nystagmus disappears. It returns again when she is told to center her eyes. Anne Margaret is trying a clockwise spin for us. Her difficulty is not simply one of coordinating muscular activity in an unpracticed direction, but is compounded by dizziness, as you can see. So far, our laboratory tests and on-ice studies have shown clearly that vestibular nystagmus occurs in figure skaters when visual fixation is not permitted. Indeed, the skaters show a few beats of nystagmus immediately after their spins with eyes open until they gain control of their eye movements by fixating on objects. However, in watching them perform graceful movements after completing their spins, it would seem that they have learned to completely inhibit all experiences of vertigo. We can now examine this question and test out the extent of their ability to control the effects of vertigo and general disorientation following their spins. Gabrielle demonstrates the ease with which she can walk on her skates with her eyes open. She is still at ease when she walks with her eyes closed. Now she will try it following the usual skater's spin. Here, the lateral semicircular canals are in the plane of rotation. With open eyes, she walks perfectly. However, if she attempts a spin which she has not so thoroughly practiced, one which puts a pair of vertical semicircular canals in the plane of rotation, and to this adds stimulation of the lateral canals, she has balance difficulty, staggers, and is aware of some dizziness. Doug and Margaret and then Pear try it too. You may also note some nystagmic eye movements here from Doug. The ability of the skaters to maneuver in a perfectly balanced fashion with open eyes following a spin is not at all surprising, since, as we have seen, their skating routines require well-coordinated movements after a spin is completed. What happens if they are prevented from seeing their environment? Like the nystagmic eye movements, is the vertigo or general disorientation which follows such spinning also inhibited by visual fixation? We have Gabrielle try walking with her eyes closed after a spin. And now, Doug. Note how Doug spreads his legs well apart to aid his balance while walking. Again, vestibular eye movements behind his closed eyelids are quite prominent. Now, Anne Margaret. As may be evident from their expressions, the skaters were completely surprised to find themselves with very little control of their movements and completely disoriented. And finally, Pear tries walking with eyes closed after a spin. Our studies have thus shown that figure skaters, in spite of constant exposure to high-velocity angular accelerations, do not have completely suppressed vestibular reactions. Rather, they have acclimated themselves to a particular turning routine, and the control of their responses appears relatively specific to the practiced plane in which the head is held, as well as to the practiced direction of turning. But most significantly, they have learned to inhibit the undesirable reactions to rapid angular acceleration, namely blurring of vision and vertigo, by means of visual orientation and visual fixation. Thus, the interaction of visual and vestibular factors will require close examination as we seek to learn more about the functioning of the human system of equilibrium.